Right into it.
Sure.
All right, welcome everybody. This is 2022 State of the Election with Rob, Noerr, and LCTRfan. We're going to be doing a 10-part series leading up to the 2022 midterm elections, the huge midterm elections, Joe Biden's first midterm elections. I think it's going to be cool to be able to have this. I'm going to try to keep it to just 1 hour, once a month between now and Election Day. And we'll have 10 of these, 10 one-hour videos, and we'll be able to look back on the campaign, and we'll be able to see where everything's at. I think it's cool to just kind of once a month have an update, see where we're at on the campaign. So, Rob, thanks so much for agreeing to do it.
Oh, I love it. I think it's a fantastic idea. And I was just telling my audience, I think you have a great mind for the type of shows that'll be entertaining and different. And I think this is going to be great, not only to lead in, but to look back then when we're done. What issues did we get right 10 months out? And how did things move forward going? So I'm really excited.
Totally, yeah, same here. And by the way, huge congratulations to you, absolutely blowing up on Twitch. I think you and me are huge examples of why conservatives should be streaming on Twitch.
I think you, as far as I know, was basically the first conservative on Twitch politics. Yep. And when I was doing YouTube and I started to see you, I did a panel with you and started to watch your show. And I think your message was spot on from the beginning, which was your prediction was, we're going to see these platforms that traditionally are for more left-leaning people are going to start to grow big. We have a long way to go, but I think you're seeing that, and I think that that you led the way, and I'm happy to be growing with you as well.
Heck yeah, twitch.tv/LCTRfan, LCTRfan, and twitch.tv/Rob Noerr, ROBNOERR. So let's have you start right off. Where do you think the 2020 midterm campaign stands today?
So I think polling's always difficult. Yeah, and I would be hypocritical to say like, oh, I trust the polls when they show our side favorable, but not when they don't. I do think that most polls tend to favor Democrats. They tend to skew a little more in their favor. So if it says Democrats are 2% up, it's probably about even. The polling looks really good at this point. I think I was reading a Gallup poll that said in the first quarter, Democrats nationally were about 11 points higher than Republicans. Now that number is 4 points higher Republican. That's a 15-point swing. And that's just nationally. So you have to understand, because a lot of states that are Democrat have huge populations like California. If that's true that nationally Republicans are winning, there's a lot of local elections and state elections and smaller states that are going to go more for Republicans. So I think it looks really good. And, it's kind of a double-edged sword. Why does it look really good for Republicans? Because the Democrats have been an abysmal failure on every single issue.
Oh, for sure. No, so I totally agree with you. I think it's looking really good right now for the Republicans. So I saw that poll, the Gallup poll, talking about party ID, and then another major poll that's almost unheard of is the Republicans actually leading in the generic congressional ballot, where they just ask generically, who would you support, a Republican or for a Democrat for Congress? And so you've seen Republicans have massive takeovers of the House when they were losing the generic congressional ballot poll. Yep. And so the fact that the Republicans are way up on the generic congressional ballot poll, that party ID, national party ID, is trending that way. Joe Biden's poll numbers obviously in the toilet. Standing here today in January 2022, I think even most left-wingers are like, yeah, the Republicans are expected to completely take over the House. And it looks like the Senate too.
Yeah, you look at the election of Youngkin versus McAuliffe. I think that's another bellwether. Like, people forget this. Youngkin, 2 months before that election, didn't have a chance. Like, all the numbers showed that he was down plus 10%. And I think Youngkin's been great. I'm very optimistic at what he did his first day in office. We'll see how he implements it. But for a first day, I thought it was as good as it gets. But the thing to remember is, it's not just because Youngkin was great. This was an abject failure of the Democrats. The problem is, and I tell my audience this all the time, when you see people like Nancy Pelosi fighting with AOC, sure, they have some differences on policies, but she's not mad in that, oh, we're not as radical as AOC. She's mad that they're letting the cat out of the bag. And that's exactly what happened in Virginia. We saw this with the official Democratic Party in Michigan 2 days ago. They released a tweet that was like, parents shouldn't have control over children's education. Then the very next day, they were like, our bad. That tweet was misinterpreted. It's not that they changed their mind. People are seeing the Democratic Party for what it is. This isn't the Democratic Party of your parents. This is an extreme radical party that wants massive wealth redistribution and wants to reshape what this country is.
Yeah, I mean, I've always actually taken that as like a point of optimism. The fact that Democrats had to lie to get elected, the fact that Democrats have to go to the American people and pretend to not be extremists, and they have to lie and say they support the Constitution just to get elected. I mean, it's like that quote, like, if the situation was hopeless, the propaganda would be unnecessary. The fact that the Democrats are having to engage in this propaganda to even have a chance is hopeful. But I think you're right. I think the cat's out of the bag. And the weird thing is the Democrats, they're not learning their lesson. I mean, I was just driving home from work listening to talk radio, and there was a news update at the top of the hour about now how Philadelphia, I think your neck of the woods, is now doing a vax pass to go into restaurants. If you're 12 or older in Philadelphia, you have to show a vaccine pass to go into a restaurant. I mean, this is insane. Like, the American people don't want this, and the Democrats, they're not learning their lesson. They're just full steam ahead on this authoritarianism insanity.
Yeah, I mean, it's really crazy. I say this all the time. What party right now is the party of free speech? I'm not saying every Republican's perfect. I have a lot of complaints about a lot of people that are elected Republicans. But in general, the right, because we've lost the culture war as it stands now, and every institution is dominated by these left-wing ideas, the right is in the position of being like, we value free speech, we value debate, right? And the left is in the position, not all of them, but many of them, and certainly in institutions in the Democratic Party, of saying we need to censor disinformation. And they've lived in a bubble so long that they're not impressive. There are talented people on the left, but they're becoming few and far between. The average person that you run into that's like a young person on Twitch that's streaming left-wing politics, they've never had someone seriously disagree with them. All through K through 12 and into secondary education, all of their entertainment choices, all of their media choices, it's a complete bubble. And that's true of the Democratic Party. They don't have to face tough questions from the media. They don't have to face the consequences. And so now that you see the emperor has no clothes and it's like, okay, things are falling apart. What do you have to say for yourself? They're just relying on the same old, our opponents are racist and the media will carry water for us. Well, people are starting to see through it.
Right. No, I mean, I just got to throw this in there, but I love how, like, I'll be streaming on Twitch, one of the very few conservatives on Twitch, and I allow people in my chat to speak freely to the extent allowed by, terms of service, and I'll read mainstream media. I'll read the sort of left-wing bias media and stuff. And then, you get people coming into your chat that are coming from places like Hassan's chat where they immediately ban you if you're a conservative. They never look at conservative media, and then they'll accuse me of being an echo chamber. And it's like, dude, I'm the only one on the platform that's actually allowing like a free debate in my chat, and some others, but like you and stuff too. But and actually, we actually do. I mean, I can make the liberal arguments, the left-wing arguments, just like you can. But what's funny is they actually can't make the conservative arguments. They don't know what they are, and they don't understand them or comprehend them. They couldn't articulate them if they tried.
Jonathan Haidt, I guess is how you pronounce it. He runs something called Heterodox Academy. Left-winger, voted against Trump. He's a Democrat. That's how he's voted. But he's starting to understand about 6-7 years ago that academia is becoming increasingly extreme left-wing. And he did this study that he replicated over and over. Basically, it goes like this. He'll go into a university. He'll say, if you're Republican, raise your hand. If you're Democrat, raise your hand. If you're independent, raise your hand. And then he gives them this sort of form that they fill out. And it says, now fill this out as you would. And it's a bunch of questions like this. If you came across a homeless person, what would you do? A, give them money. B, try to get them job training. C, basically step over them and tell them to get a job, you bum. Things like that. And what he found was he would then give that report to the people and say, now fill it out as you assume the other side would. And Republicans were overwhelmingly able to predict how Democrats would fill it out. But the Democrats almost universally picked the most evil option for the Republicans every time. Right. And so what he found was Republicans understand Democrats, but Democrats think that Republicans are just evil. They can't understand them. They don't. And that's exactly what you see.
Yeah, no doubt. Okay, so right now, the Democrats have a 10-seat majority in the House. Democrats 222 to Republicans 212. If you had to just take a wild guess, where do you think the how many seats do the Republicans pick up in the House in 2022?
So they're down how many now?
They're down
They're
10.
10 down, right?
It's 222 to 212.
I could see them easily picking up between 50 and 70 seats.
Yeah, I agree, and that would be on par with like 2010, the Tea Party takeover, which was one of the biggest takeovers of the House since the early 1900s. It feels the same way as it did in 2010, where not only is the Republican base extremely fired up, I think the Republican base is super fired up, but I think you are seeing an awakening amongst Democrats, because like what you were saying, where Democrats, they actually just they call people racist and stuff like that, and they're starting to do that to Democrats too. You know, it's not just Republicans. It's like if you're a Democrat and you don't toe the line, they start calling you these names and stuff like that. And so I think that is not working for people. So I would agree. I would say 50 seats, which would make the Republicans, at 270 and the Democrats at like, 170 or 180. That would be a huge swing.
The question then becomes, what did they do with it, which is another entire discussion to have. But, I think that there is an opportunity for Republicans to really start to become the big tent party. I think that Republicans are the party of judging people based on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. We see that every day. The left wants to focus on your sexual identity, your gender, wants to focus on your race. Those are the sort of things they do. Republicans should just say, here is what we stand for. We basically are for small government. We can quibble about specific issues, but in general, the theme is we trust people more than we trust government. We think that you'll make the best decisions for you. We want smaller government. The Democrats disagree. They think that they should have total control of your life, and they're getting more extreme with it. And I think that you're absolutely right. You're seeing people that have identified as Democrats, lifelong Democrats, that are saying, where's my party?
Right.
Well, I don't get it. And this is when the Republicans need to reach out and say, listen, the way they're treating you now, that's how they've treated us. We are not the monsters that they painted us. And this is what our party stands for and why you should come join.
Yeah, like look at what they did to Joe Manchin. Joe Manchin did one thing wrong, and they literally said you're anti-woman, you're anti-black, you're anti-immigrant. They just down the laundry list of things for Joe Manchin, like a long time Democrat. But so your thing about being a big tent party, I agree with that. But on the other hand, I also do see on the right a lot of need to primary certain Republicans and get actual conservatives in and that's, I think, a big piece of 2022 is who are going to win. And we can talk about the Senate races. I was looking through the Senate races. There's a number of Senate races where the GOPs have open, or the Republicans have open primary, and I think that's going to be a huge defining characteristic of the 2022 midterms is who do the Republicans go with in these open primaries, where you've got these open primaries where you've got more establishment Republicans, and then you've got more conservative Republicans and stuff like that. So while I agree that the Republicans have an opportunity to go big tent, at the same time there's also a need to basically get Republicans in there that will actually vote to balance the budget, or actually vote to shrink the size of government, or that won't be corrupt in establishment and all these different things.
I totally agree. Like, the win is hollow if we just get a bunch of people that are just going to agree with Democrats on everything. In fact, that's worse. That's worse than losing. And it's something I told Democrats going into the 2020 election. If you were a progressive, the worst thing that could have happened to you was Joe Biden winning. Literally, you would have been further ahead for Trump and Republicans to sweep, because at least then the progressive agenda would have still been on the table. But what happened was they allowed Joe Biden and the corporatist Democrats to co-opt it. And Joe Biden and company, they don't care about Black Lives Matter. They don't care at all. They just saw it as a vehicle to get elected. That was it. And I said, wait and see. They won't care about those issues as soon as they're elected. The same's true now going into 2022. If we get a bunch of Republicans that are just going to be like, well, the next time there's an illness, we need to lock down, and we need to have massive trillion-dollar spending bills, and that's worthless. So we need to, when I say Republicans could be big tent, and I volunteered for campaigns. I was offered a job for campaigns. I ran for Congress myself. And what I tell people in the Republican Party is, You don't have to change your message to reach out to people that don't traditionally vote Republican.
Right.
You should be able to articulate why small government, balanced budgets is good for everyone, regardless of what their social beliefs are. It's good for everyone. And if we don't start getting Republicans like that in elected office, they're Republican in name only, and it won't do any good.
No, yeah, I think that's kind of the same thought I always have towards minority groups, and that could be another huge change or major change that we see in 2022 is Latinos and blacks going more towards the Republican, and you're starting to see that in polls and big articles that are coming out talking about how Latinos and stuff are switching GOP, and it's like I agree with you. It's like, dude, when you're talking to Latinos and you're talking to blacks, you don't have to have some specialized message that's directed at you talk about freedom. You talk about liberty. You talk about good economy, small government, making people's lives the best that they can be. You talk about how the Democrats are hurting your pocketbooks. You talk about inflation. I mean, blacks and Latino. That's it's so insulting to me that some of these like Republicans and especially Democrats, they think that Latinos and blacks are like this monolithic group where they all think the same, and they don't care about the things that normal Americans care about, and they only care about, XYZ issues. It's like, no, these are good American, normal American. They care about freedom, they care about liberty, they care about inflation, they care about all these things. We don't need to have some specialized message. And I think if the Republicans can do that and we continue to see, I mean, if the Latinos shift GOP, the Democrat Party is basically over. I mean, if the Republicans get Latinos and blacks to start voting Republican, which I think they should, and there's a good chance of it, the Democrats can't win anymore.
Yeah, and what's funny is, right, I find it hilarious, like, when I argue to, like, people on the right that are, like, the race realist and that type of crew, one of the things that I find most hilarious is, if your values are conservative values, most of the time, blacks and Latinos average being more conservative on values than whites. That's
Right.
absolutely true. It really is. The problem is this. I'll tell you a quick story. When I was volunteering for a campaign, I was talking to some high state level people in Pennsylvania. And when I finally got to ask a question, as I sit there and listen to them, oh, we're going to put up yard signs. We're going to do mailers. And I'm like, what are we doing to reach out to populations that traditionally don't vote Republican? And they're like, well, who do you mean? I said, single women, young people, inner city blacks. What are we doing to reach out to them? And they told me, well, we're trying to drive out the base. We're trying to go after the low hanging fruit. And what I told them is, I sincerely believe that what conservatism stands for is better for all of those groups I just mentioned. But why would they ever vote for us if we're not out there talking to them? And that's the irony. When you look at like a lot of what people like, despite what CNN will tell you, most inner city people didn't want to defund the police. They didn't want to. They see the terrible nature of what happens. They don't want to be talked to as if they're just monolithic and they believe, they have different values than everyone else. They care about their families. They care about being able to provide for their families economically, right? That's what they care about. And that's the message that we should be running on. So, yeah, I'm not saying that it's a magic bullet that, all of a sudden 70% of blacks are going to vote Republican in 2022. But that's not what we need. And
Right.
it's a constant effort, just like anything else. If conservatives continue to make a push to say, you're absolutely right to be upset that we weren't talking to you as much as we should, but here's our message, and we're not pandering to you. This is what we believe for everyone. I think that you're going to start to see a radical change because these populations, they don't agree with what these radical Democrats are saying. They
That's
just
the
feel
funny
like,
thing.
well, I vote Democrat because I'm told I'm supposed to. That's what I've done generationally.
Yeah, no, that's like you. I don't know if you've seen those polls or studies about the Latinx or Latinx or whatever, where it's all these like rich white progressive liberals that are using that term. But then if you actually poll the Hispanic population, like nobody actually wants to use that phrase or that
Yeah,
term.
it's ridiculous. And I mean, there's a lot of stuff. Now, I happen to be okay with gay marriage. I think that it's settled. But when you go back and look, what was it, Prop 18 or whatever in California that legalized gay marriage? It failed the first time. You know why it failed? Because 90-something% of blacks in the state voted against it. Right? They are more conservative on that issue than white people. And yet they'll continue to vote Democrat because basically Democrats have been so shrewd at pushing the message that the Republican Party and conservatives are racist. They can't articulate why. And it's just, to me, that's the message. The message is you might have slightly different issues that are more concerned to you. It has nothing to do with your skin color. It has to do with your situation. But what we can promise you is this. We're going to tell you what we really believe. We're not going to lie like the Democrats. And we're going to treat you as an individual. We don't care that you're black. You just happen to be black. That's not the part of you we're interested in. We're interested in you as an individual. And if you're tired of being pandered to like you're a child and you're just a member of your skin color, then we think that you should prefer sort of the arguments that we're. And I think that's what it is. It's just this stigma that, oh, well, the Republican Party's racist. Even when you look at the big issue that they're trying to pivot to now, which is voting rights, most blacks polled like 71% think you should have an ID to vote. Like this isn't issues that anyone really is out there saying, yeah, this is my big issue.
I mean, I disagree with you, I guess, on the social issues. I'm definitely more traditional on the social issues. And frankly, I think that is a key to Republicans winning. And I mean, you look at some of the minority communities like Latinos and blacks, and they are also pretty conservative when it comes to sexual morality and stuff like that. And moreover, I mean, just to play devil's advocate a little bit here to your comment about driving out the base. I mean, you look at turnout, even in an election year, you've got 35% of Americans that don't vote. Okay. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of people. That's 35% of the people that aren't even voting, even in presidential elections, let alone congressional elections. I'm convinced that 35% of people are average Americans, normal Americans. Yep. They support the Constitution. They support freedom, common sense, things like that. If you could get those people out to vote, I think they would most likely vote Republican. And if you look historically, I mean, particularly at the presidential level, when the Republicans choose a conservative candidate or somebody that excites the GOP base, think Donald Trump, George W. Bush, very conservative socially. Ronald Reagan, very conservative. They always win. When the Republicans go with these moderates, and they don't excite the base, think Mitt Romney, John McCain, that's when they lose. So I think, it's obviously a balancing act, but I think you've got to maintain principles enough to keep the base excited, because if you lose the base, then you lose the election.
I don't disagree with that, but here's the beauty of it. If you're not pandering and pretending to be something you're not when you're talking to different populations, then you could drive out the base and reach out to other communities. Right?
Oh, totally.
Because your message is the same. You're not like, we don't have to do like the Democrats. We don't have to hide what we really believe. We can say this is what we believe. When I ran for office, this is what I said. I was like, it's my job as someone running to impart to the voters of what my positions are. And it's your job to understand those positions and choose the right fit for you. If I'm not the right fit for you, that's absolutely fine. Vote for who's the right fit for you. That's the way the system's designed to be. Instead, what we see is career politicians that make all these promises that, they'll go to city A and they'll say what they think that city wants to hear. And then they're at the country club and they say what they want to hear. Republicans could just say, this is our message. This is it. It's the same message to everyone. And I do think you're right, though. I think that, one of the things I think got Trump in trouble was I think that he started to pander. This is a very low on the totem pole, but he started to pander too much. Like, let's bring in Kim Kardashian. Let's see what she says about, prison reform and things like that. If you want to do it, fine. Right. But the problem was, I think that he was doing things like, if we're honest, I was just looking back at my videos and stuff in March of 2020. Trump was pushing lockdowns. Trump was praising Newsom. Trump was praising Cuomo. Right? That sort of stuff, I think, harmed him more. It took away his base. It made them less enthusiastic. Now, there was all sorts of other things going on as well. But the point is this, like, you can drive out that base. You're absolutely right. I'm tired of this narrative that comes from establishment Republicans like, well, we need a moderate. We need someone that, we need someone that Chuck Schumer's willing to work with. No, that's not what the American people want. American people don't like Chuck Schumer's agenda. So why don't you just put someone that represents the values of conservatism, and that's what will be popular.
No, I agree, and they want to paint conservatives as extremists, and they think, oh, if you want to balance the budget, you're a racist, and it's like that has nothing to do with race. I want to balance the budget. That's not a racial issue. So, but I think if the Republicans and the conservatives need to figure out a way to get through to the American people that our values and our beliefs are good for everybody, and they help everybody, and what the Democrats are doing is pure lies. I think that's going to be huge, and frankly, I think one of the greatest lasting impacts that Donald Trump had is helping people realize how corrupt the media is, and how corrupt the Democrats are, and how corrupt Washington D.C. is. I think there's a lot more Americans now that are inclined to disagree and believe that the media is lying than there were before Trump took office. And frankly, I always thought Trump did a pretty good job of maintaining the same message to everybody. And he would I remember Trump would say at rallies, that, Hispanics and blacks, they like low unemployment too. They want a strong economy too. So like Trump's economic message, I mean, that I think did really well. And didn't Trump win more percentages in terms of Latinos than like any Republican ever?
Yeah, even with blacks, I think he did pretty well compared to most Republicans and what they do. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Where Trump lost ground was basically suburban women, suburban white women. That's where he really hurt, and that had more to do with who he was stylistically than what his policies were. I mean, the entire argument to vote against Trump, they weren't really voting against Trump's record, other than COVID, which we see how well Biden did with that, right? But other than that, what did they really have negative to say about him? He's just an unlikable person,
right,
like
mean tweets.
That was about it,
Right.
And there's a certain, so, here's what I think. I think it is important to continue to push that, particularly that economic argument. But here's the sales pitch that you have to traditional Democrats, right, that maybe don't buy that. How do you convince someone who wants Medicare for all that they should vote Republican? You know how you convince them? One, the Democrats aren't going to give it to you. And second, even if that's something you want, do you understand the corruption and the extremism of the Democratic Party right now? Like, they will literally censor you as soon as you go off the reservation. They're going to keep you under control for the rest of your life if they can, using policies that they gained over COVID, mandates and things like that. And so that's how you reach those people. And the other thing is that you talked about, I agree with you totally when you talk about 35% of people not voting. Most of the people that live in my little rural Pennsylvania community, most of them never voted in their lives until like 2016. But even the ones that were like, I don't care about politics, well, they care now. You want to know why they care? Because they got locked down from going to work. And now they can't pay their mortgage. And they're struggling to fill up their gas tank every day. You might not think politics affects your life, but it does. And more people than ever are waking up to that because of the extremists in the establishment, even some Republicans, but certainly in the Democratic Party. And so now is the crucial time to strike, to say, this is why it's important to get involved, get out there and vote for people that want to give you more freedom and smaller government, because it will expand exponentially until the American people say enough is enough.
Yeah, I think there's a better message to try to reach the Democrats. I totally agree with everything you said about going to these traditional Democrats and talking about how corrupt the Democrat Party is and how they'll censor you and how they're never going to give you Medicare for all. And then on top of that, I think you got to explain that having a government takeover of the healthcare sector is not going to be, unicorns and rainbows and all wonderful and we all get high quality healthcare for free. That's not how it works. In fact, what happens is you get worse quality, you get horrible customer service, you're not able to then even see doctors anymore. The quality goes way down. Plus it drives up debt. There's tons of corruption. So even if they could implement that policy, the consequences are disastrous. But I also think the Republicans need to have, a good alternative policy. And frankly, I've got one, which is you slowly phase out Medicare and Medicaid, send that back to the states. If the states want to have Medicare, Medicaid type programs, great, but it shouldn't be done at the federal government. It's too inefficient. It's too corrupt. And then you get the federal government out of regulating the healthcare sector at all, and free up that system. And that drives down price, that drives up quality, and that's really how you get to a point where people can actually afford healthcare again. I mean, everything the federal government touches, the price skyrockets. I mean, look at tuition cut from federal government involvement in student loans. I mean, on and on and on. So I think you got to have that. But all right, let me.
No, I don't disagree. I'll just say this real quick. You're absolutely right. There's going to be a certain percentage of people that just are like, nope, I want Medicare for all. And I'm saying you could even reach those people. But, just real quick, now is a key time to be tough. Have you ever seen a more obvious answer as to why the government getting involved in these sort of medical decisions is a disaster? Why can't we get
Right.
monoclonal treatments? The government hoarded up all the remdesivir and all this stuff. Now states can't get it, right? Like everything they've touched during COVID when they said, oh, we're going to get involved. Don't worry, Joe Biden's going to send one K95 mask to everyone. He's going to send one to everyone. Oh, and if you want to test, you can go through the government website and they'll send you a COVID test in 7 to 12 days. Like that ineptitude. And you want them to run the entire medical sector in this country?
Oh, for
They
sure.
can't even figure these simple things out.
Totally. Okay, you brought up, I wanted to move on to some Senate issues and some Senate races and stuff. But first, you had said something that reminded me of something that I read recently that basically said, don't speak too soon on 2022 because it's all dependent on COVID. And if COVID goes away and we're back to normal and blah, 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 then the Democrats are going to do just fine in 2022. And if COVID continues to be around, do you think there's any merit to that?
I think that it's not necessarily 100% the case, but that's leaning towards the truth, right? And the Democrats believe that, right? That's why you're starting to see this shift at the national level. Like all of a sudden they're like, well, we're not going to count deaths anymore. Is it deaths from COVID or deaths with COVID? Something they called us conspiracy theorists for saying. They're saying,
Right.
well, wait a minute, cases aren't important. Cases
Right.
aren't important. In reality, it's just serious cases that require ICU or that result in deaths. So they're going to try as we get close. You saw this with Newsom in the recall election, right? That's going to be their national strategy. Newsom in the recall, he was the worst governor for basically having all these arbitrary lockdowns that he himself didn't follow. And then all of a sudden, once the recall happened, he lifted them all. He was like, oh, no more mask mandate. You can go out, you can go to the restaurant, right? Because, now, and then people were like, whoo, we got through that difficult part. Now we could vote for Newsom again. And then, of course, once he's reelected, it's like, oh, boy, now we got to start looking for these lockdowns. So it's our job. What we need to do is we don't have to make stuff up. We just tell them the truth. They will, for political reasons, start to lift some of these mandates and things like that. But if they're reelected, they're going to put them right back in again. And so, yeah, it might look better. People, and keep in mind this, it's not just the deaths. The pain is the lockdowns, the mandates, the supply chain crunches, the fact that we have 15% less hospital beds now than we did in 2020, or staffed hospital beds, largely because we're firing nurses because of these mandates and things like that. That's where the pain's coming in. And the government is messed with. I always use this example. Imagine that you wake up one day and gas is $2.50 a gallon. And then the next day, the government's like, we're going to tax it double. So now it's $5 a gallon. And for a month, you're like, oh, this sucks. And then they're like, you know what? We're going to lower it back to $3.50 a gallon. And you're like, whoo, thank goodness. Man, what a relief. Well, in reality, they just raised the price of gas $1 a gallon. But it feels like a relief because they put so much pain on you for a period of time that when they slightly relax it, that it feels like a relief. And that's what they're going to try.
Okay. I don't know. Maybe I'm giving the American people too much credit, but I would hope that most Americans realize at this point that COVID is not controlled by politicians. Like whether COVID is around or bad, or it's not determined by, what a politician does or does not do. That's been, I think, the big lesson of this whole COVID pandemic is that everybody seems to think that the government can control the virus. And if the government does the right thing, then there's no virus. And if the government does a bad thing, then there's lots of virus. It's like, no, the virus is just going to go around and do whatever it wants regardless of anything the government does. But there's still a huge element that of the populace that's going to maybe vote based on where we're at with the virus. But I don't know. I think I traditionally
Right.
thought
like,
I thought that traditionally though that like Democrats would overplay coronavirus so that they could then do all mail ballots. And all of those election sort of things again. So, but you're also right that like it seems like everything that conservatives have been saying for the last 2 years of this pandemic, suddenly now the liberals are now saying it, Democrats are now saying it. It's like, wait, you were literally censoring and purging and banning people for saying that, and now like you guys are out there saying it and admitting it. Cloth masks don't work. They're now admitting cloth masks don't work. That you get banned for saying that before. Questioning the death numbers, same thing. On and on all these different issues, and it's like, it's just incredible to see that. But let's move on to the Senate really quick. Go ahead.
Quick, I agree with you when it comes to, I don't know any politician anywhere in the world that any policy effectively in a serious way dampened how much of an effect COVID had. But
Right.
what they did do was harm the economy and harm people's freedoms. Like, you could take a country like Sweden or a state like Florida and then compare it to the states or the countries that went the exact opposite way, and their death rates are commiserate. Their
Right.
infection rates are commiserate
Yep.
over time. There might be specific times you could look, and this is the clever trick they play. Oh, COVID cases are the highest in Florida. Look how bad it is in Florida. Yeah, because it's seasonal. So in the summer it looked high. Then in the winter they had the lowest cases. But they didn't say, wow, look how good Florida is doing. And so the message to send to people is like, this is another example of the government saying, we need to have total control of this. We need to make people make sacrifices. It did almost nothing to help the bottom line, which was help people from COVID. But what it did do was create a bunch of other problems.
Totally, yeah. And you're seeing people now get absolutely outraged when the Democrats and Fauci are out there saying, well, everybody's going to eventually be exposed to COVID anyways. And so everybody should get their vax because everybody's eventually going to be exposed. And everybody's like, hold on, what? Everybody's going to be. That was another thing that conservatives said early on that they got attacked for. But now that's accepted. But now everybody's questioning, why the heck did we do all of this lockdown, restriction, garbage, horrible stuff that was horribly authoritarian, destroyed people's lives, violated people's liberties, when we're all just going to get exposed to it anyway? But okay, so I don't know how much you've looked at the Senate. The Senate right now, obviously 50-50. According to Real Clear Politics, Battle for the Senate 2022. First of all, this is the Senate map in 2022 is very friendly for Democrats because the Democrats only have, the Democrats have 34 senators that are not up in 2022. The Republicans only have 30 senators that are not up in 2022. So, but even with that, according to Real Clear Politics, there's 47 safe Republican seats and there's 46 safe Democrat seats with 7 different toss-ups. Starting with the GOP, they've got Alabama as a likely GOP, and that's another open primary. That Alabama seat is going to be one where you're going to see, I think, an interesting GOP primary. And then Alaska, Lisa Murkowski up in Alaska, they've just recently changed Alaska's laws to be this new voting system in Alaska, ranked choice voting in Alaska. Lisa Murkowski does have a challenger on the right, endorsed by Trump. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on. Well, first of all, I guess just big picture Senate. Where do you think the? I'll just start with that. I think the Republicans come out with 51. Maybe 52 Senate seats after 2022. What do you think?
That if the election was held today, I absolutely agree. We'll see how things change, but right now that would be my prediction as well. That despite the fact that it's not favorable, the amount of seats that are up for Republicans, I think that the Democrats are doing so poor of a job that you're actually going to see that the vast majority of these seats will be won by Republicans. As far as Murkowski, I am not a fan at all.
Me neither.
She has proven, I want leaders. I don't want it. You're worthless to me as a Republican if you're just going to be a focus group Republican. Oh, what's the focus groups tell me to say today? That's worthless. And I think there's an awful lot of them to criticize. I said this all through, why was it that someone like me, and I don't remember exactly what you were saying in March of 2022, but I was criticizing lockdowns and things like that. I was criticizing my governor in Pennsylvania, Tom Wolf. He said there are 2 Pennsylvanias, one for white people and one for black people. I was writing to my representatives like, can I get one of my elected officials to be like, wait, what? No. But they wouldn't do it. And they wouldn't say anything about lockdowns until like 4 or 5 months later, once it was obvious that people were like, we're fed up with this. Then they came out. They should be at the forefront of what conservatism is. They shouldn't wait until the people that voted for them are like, are you going to do something about this? And that Murkowski personifies that. She'll literally go along with every major issue that the Democrats want, and then she'll placate to our base by saying, oh, but the Second Amendment, I'm for the Second Amendment. But when it comes to the actual voting on the important issues that her vote will make a difference, she's going to be with the establishment every time.
100% agree with that. So the Kelly Shabaka is the conservative challenging Lisa Murkowski. Do you know anything about Kelly Shabaka?
I do not.
Oh, I did a little bit of looking into her. She's been on Steve Bannon's War Room,
That's a good
and
sign.
she's been on OAN, I think, and stuff like that. So, and I think she might be endorsed by Trump. So that what'll be interesting is we'll talk about some of these Senate primaries, and then like maybe next month we'll probably both like we'll be able to pay more attention, and next month we'll be able
Yeah.
to give a little update. So Alaska will be interesting. I'd love to see Kelly Shabaka take out Lisa Murkowski. In the Alabama Senate primary, you've got Katie Britt, Mo Brooks, and Michael Durant running in the Alabama primary. I think Mo Brooks is pretty much a shoe in there. I'm not sure if
Yeah,
you.
I would agree.
And then the
I would
Democrat,
agree. Yeah.
yeah, Brandon Dean. I don't know if there's any question about that one. Another really interesting open GOP primary is Missouri. You've got Eric Greitens, Vicky Hartzler, Billy Long, and Eric Schmidt running for the GOP in Missouri. Any thoughts on that one?
Honestly, I haven't followed. I've been following the Pennsylvania one closely.
That's a
I
big
was
one. That's a huge one. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I've been following that closely. But as far as many of these other seats, I haven't got into looking at the actual people running at this point.
No, me neither.
But
Really.
yeah, you know, I can tell you this in Pennsylvania, like just an interesting sort of scandal that's going on. I think the favorite to win the GOP primary was Sean Parnell, who was someone that was quite vocal nationally talking about the election changes that occurred in Pennsylvania and corruption that was going on there. He had to drop out of the race because sort of this Democrat activist lawyer basically took custody away from his children based on allegations that his ex-wife just came out of the blue with. That was like, oh, he was abusive. And so
Yeah.
now he has to put all this time into trying to get his children, sort of the dirty pool that you expect the Democratic Party to be playing. So
Yeah, I thought
now
that
it's going
was
to be more
horrible
open.
that
Yeah.
he would have to drop out just because of allegations, and I just that's a really sad situation. So I was trying to figure out Dr. Oz. I have no idea. Is he legit? I was watching him and listening to him. I'm like, dude, I cannot tell. And that's a difficult piece, I think, with a lot of these Senate primaries, is really trying to figure out if some of these people are legit. And I think at some point we'll have to get to Ohio. The Ohio Senate primary is really interesting with J.D. Vance and Josh Mandel and stuff like that. But start on
Yeah.
Dr. Oz. Is Dr. Oz legit or no?
No, I think he's terrible. I think that he's going to be this sort of kind of in the vein of like someone like Murkowski. I think that he's someone that's an establishment Republican that's going to go along with the establishment line. So, like, if
That's the take I
you're
had.
right, you're conservative, right? And you hear that someone's a doctor. What's one of the first issues that you think would you be like, oh, this is something that they would have value to weigh in? And I would think something like abortion. You're a doctor. You're running as a conservative. Okay, like he refuses to answer like what his position on abortion is when he thinks life, begins. He, he,
Yeah.
he won't answer on. And now I'm not saying that's the end all be all. I'm not. I know some Republicans that is the end all be all. But what I am saying is when that's his background being a doctor and he can't even answer that, what do you think he's going to be like? To me, he just seems like it's the stereotypical. Let's get a name. Let's get a name that people know, and then we'll just get him out there to basically be the commercial face of the people that are running the show behind him. And the people running the show behind him are sort of the rhino establishment corporatist Republicans. And so, no, I hope that Dr. Oz, goes down in flames. And so far, the first straw poll, despite the massive amount of money he's putting in, he only got one vote out of the first straw poll, which was, I can tell you, the scuttlebutt I hear around here is that really worried his campaign how poor they did in that first showing.
Well, yeah, I watched an interview with Dr. Oz and Sean Hannity last night, and all of Dr. Oz's answers were just like so cliche, and there was nothing original in them, and all this stuff. And like he was asked about immigration, and he immediately started talking about fentanyl coming across the border, and it's like, yeah, I get that, but like there's bigger issues and more genuine issues you can talk about. So I was kind of like, he was saying some of the stuff that sounded right, but I never even heard of Dr. Oz. I've never seen him on TV or anything like that. I mean, Trafalgar ran a poll for the Pennsylvania Senate Republican primary in middle of December, and Oz was up 11. So who's gonna do it? They've got Jeff Bardos, Carla Sands, Everett Stern all running, and who's second and who's legit?
So I think that both Jeff and Carla are legit. I personally talked to both of them, been at several, got to hear them speak and talk to several. Carla, I think one of the things I was impressed with was she's very personable. She seems like someone that actually could run out and talk. You have to say, when I go to one of these events, I stick out like a bump on a log. And, so I got to talk to her for about 5 to 10 minutes. And she very much is concerned with corruption and the way that the voting went down in 2020 here in Pennsylvania. And I think to most Pennsylvanians that are Republicans for that primary, that's going to be the key issue. I really believe that. I think that there's so many people that are like, we can't believe, and I could talk to you for hours about what happened in Pennsylvania. I'm not even talking about did Dominion change vote. I'm talking about things like passing months before the election that your voter ID signature doesn't have to match the signature on your mail-in ballots, or the fact that they were supposed to keep stacks of ballots for all sorts of categories, such as ballots that came in after the election day, ballots that were postmarked before election but came in after, ballots that were postmarked after, ballots that signatures didn't match. And whoops, they forgot. They put them all in one big pile, and now we can't sort through them. Like these
Right.
sort of things that occurred. And so if you're a Republican here, and understand, it's slightly different. A primary is slightly different than a general election. Like, it's more inside baseball. You will have general people that are voting just on the name they see on TV and things like that. But a lot of it is people that are more involved in politics saying, like, who do we think's really going to steer this ship right? And I think there are a lot of furious Republican voters in what happened with that election in 2020. And so, we'll see. I don't hear Dr. Oz talking anything about that, by the way.
No, I don't either. And I agree that that's a huge issue for a lot of voters, and for good reason. Election integrity is so important, and the Democrats have for 30 years been destroying election integrity, and so there's a lot to change there. So good to hear. Hopefully somebody good can win that Pennsylvania GOP primary and can win the state.
If you like, I will tell you this. If you would be interested in this, I am setting up. We're going to get a lot of those Republican people that are going to come on my former radio show. It won't be a radio show. It'll just be streamed. But if you would like to come on and help moderate that, I would be more than happy to have you. We're going to try to get as many as possible and do like a 2-hour debate, which, despite what my feelings might be for who I'm pushing for, I'm going to try to be as even-handed as possible.
Wait, so you're gonna try to get the Senate candidates?
The Senate and the gubernatorial. Yep.
In a primary?
Yeah,
dude, nice. That's awesome. That's fantastic.
Yeah,
and
really we did debates like this going into 2020 as well. And actually, one of the debates we had, it was the Democrat. It was a state election, Democrat versus Republican. The Republican no-showed, and out of integrity, I had to give the 2 hours to the Democrat. What am I supposed to do? They showed up, and so I was like, I'm not going to vote for you, but I'll give you a fair shake and allow you to articulate your opinions. And so,
and so that's going to be on the radio or on Twitch or both.
It'll be on Twitch.
Okay.
The radio show might come. We're in the works. Just real quick, the radio person who owned the radio station, a friend of mine, Todd Bartley, one of the best journalists in the country. He had some things dealing where he was moving around the country and he was working with some bigger shows, but he's trying to get that back before the 2022 primary, which then it would be simul-streamed on my Twitch and the radio.
Oh, okay. Awesome. Yeah, well, keep me posted on that one.
I will.
Okay, so the other really interesting GOP Senate primary, I think, is Ohio. You've got Josh Mandel, J.D. Vance, Mike Gibbons, and Jane Timken. Apparently, J.D. Vance is a huge big deal. Do you know much about J.D. Vance?
You see him on social media a lot, and he seems to be sort of a firebrand. He seems to be the type of person that's on Twitter saying things that I agree with. Like, for example, off the top of my head, he was huge on the Rittenhouse. Just how disgusting the treatment of him he was. And he seems to be in that vein of like a Donald Trump that's just like, I don't care, I'm going to go on the offense. Now, I can't tell you that I've seen all of his positions, but that's a name that I know. And I think,
So, yeah, what made me really suspicious of him is that he gets a ton of praise in the mainstream press, including Washington Post, New York Times. I guess he's known for basically explaining Trump voters to coastal elites. He wrote a book called Hillbilly Elegy, I guess, in 2016 that was a huge big deal. And so the Washington Post and the New York Times praise him all the time, saying, "Oh, if you wanna understand the Trump voter, you have to talk to J.D. Vance and read his." And then he was a CNN contributor, and so I don't know. I'm a little bit suspicious of him, just kind of like I was with Dr. Oz. It's like, yeah, they can say the right thing. you're saying the right thing, but at the same time, like, how can we really know? Like, you don't have a voting record. You're getting praised by the Washington Post,
Yep.
and New York Times. I don't know. Josh Mandel, I think he's the real deal.
I agree. And like look, this is a terrible way to go through life, but it's not people like me and you's fault that we're suspicious. It's the institutions themselves. Right? I say this all the time. Like people were like, "Oh, you're too hard on the intel agencies." That's not my fault. It's because they've been so terrible for so long. You're a fool if you're just trusting them. That's exactly. So there are certain benchmarks, right? Like if I see, CNN, if Jake Tapper's like, "This Republican's the real deal," Rachel Maddow's like, "Well, at least this is a
let's go,
Republican."
Brandon.
The little lizard part in my brain is like, "Wait, what?
Let's go, Brandon."
I need to relook at this guy because if she likes him, I probably don't.
Right.
And I agree with you, especially if you don't have a voting record. It's easy. I mean, it's a dime a dozen. Look at like if you're listening and you doubt this, look at a company like Black Rifle Coffee. How easy was it for them to dupe conservatives? We're for America. We're for the troops. Yay! We'll have American-looking ladies shooting rifles in our ads and stuff like that. And then when the rubber met the road,
let's go, Brandon.
Horrible people that were like ashamed of Trump voters and ashamed of the very people buying their coffee. So it's easy if you don't have a record to just be like, yeah, I'm a real conservative. I'm coming in. And so it is important to vet these people. And, we do need to look more into them.
Totally. Yeah. So I think that'll be an interesting one to really watch Ohio to see what those GOP primary candidates do. Another I think interesting one is Georgia. Raphael Warnock going up against Herschel Walker. It sounds like Herschel Walker's pretty much got that primary in the bag. I'm a big fan of Herschel Walker.
Me too. I was a big fan of him sports, like not only fantastic football player, but then USA bobsledder as well, and did I think some fighting. But no, Herschel Walker is someone. I think that almost the situation we're in with these institutions being so controlled by the left right now, I think sometimes, as long as you're conservative on the most important issues, sometimes the type of person you are is more important than agreeing with me on every specific policy. And Herschel Walker has exhibited that he is a fighter, that he's not going to back down. He's not, to me, the fundamental characteristic of the Democratic Party is corruption, and the fundamental characteristic of the Republican Party is cowardice. And so to see someone like him, who's just like, I'm going to take it on the chin, I'm coming right out, I think is fantastic. Ralph Warnock, this guy has said some of the most disgusting, despicable things. He said before he got elected, remember he said that, like, I forget exactly what his term, I'll look it up here in a second, but he's basically said our country needs to reject the whiteness that it has. Say that about any other race. See how that works. Tell 60% of the population that they need to reject their ethnicity. He #believe all women, except for Ralph Warnock, when his wife actually called the police and said that he ran over her foot and attacked her and things like that. Oh, we don't believe any of that. So yeah, I think Herschel Walker is the exact right type of person to take on someone like Warnock and call him out for his extremism, his race grifting, and I think Herschel Walker has conservative values and is a fighter and will be very good in Georgia.
Amen. And I think he can beat Raphael Warnock. That was a total fluke. That whole Georgia thing was so weird. With you had Lynn Wood and Sidney Powell and stuff telling people not to vote, and that was a strange situation. I don't think that represents Georgia.
Yeah, and I'll just say about all of that stuff, I'll say this. It doesn't matter what you think about corruption and things like this. The reality is, if you make the decision, well, it's so corrupt, so I'm just going to check out, then it doesn't even have to be corrupt anymore. Right? You understand that? And no matter, even if you believe that there's corruption operates on a sort of exponential scale. So if, for example, if a race is decided by 1,000 votes, it's very easy for corruption to swing that. But if a race is decided by 50,000 votes, it becomes far more difficult. And so when you're driving down your own base by saying, you know what, don't go out there and vote, it's all screwed up anyways, that's a huge mistake. That's even more reason to get out there and vote.
No, I agree. It's one of my pet peeves, and I actually see it a lot with Twitch chatters too, that say it's not worth it to vote, the elections are corrupt and stuff like that. And it's like, Look, I'm one of the firmest believers in significant election integrity reform,
Me
including
too.
requiring people to show up on the polls at the polls on election day, except in extreme situations like you're a
Yep.
military overseas. You should have to prove your citizenship to register. The county should have to update their voter list every single year. You should have to prove residency when you register. You should have to show voter ID when you come up to vote. There should be you should keep the ballots in a secure room with poll watchers there all day long, and then the poll watchers watch the election, and they also then watch that you count the ballots. I mean, we know how to run secure elections, it's just we don't, because Democrats have destroyed the voting laws over the last 30 years. I mean, this has been a slow changing process to where we've gone from an election day with showing up and showing an ID and all these different requirements to now we have election month where you can
Right.
vote for a month and you don't have to show anything. And that's really destroyed the public confidence in the elections. But I tell people, you have to vote. We have to, even if you're right, even if it's corrupt, even if they're cheating, like we can still overwhelm the polls and win by the margin of cheating or whatever. So, but that's one of my pet peeves. So I'm glad that we're on the same board. On
Mhm.
the same page. It's still worth it to vote. It's incredibly important to vote. We got to get out there and vote. And 2022 is going to be huge.
And we could have a discussion about like elections. I also think we should have random audits of like 10% of every election. And part of that audit should literally be contacting the people that voted and telling them that they don't have to disclose how they voted, but if they would like to, for the sake of election security, and seeing if people's vote matches up so we could ferret out not just fraud, but also accidental. Some of these screens that you touch, you don't know. It could be changing, not even nefariously. And particularly if you're someone not used to technology, you might be interested to find out, like, oh, did you know last election you voted for X, Y, and Z? And you said, no, I didn't mean to. So I think we need that. One other thing I'll say on this note, one of the most discouraging things to me going into 2020 was not just online, but also in Republican events I was going to in person, the hubris that people had. I constantly talked to people that said, Trump's going to win 48 out of 50 states. It's a blowout. But then you can't have that mindset. You could be optimistic. One of my favorite people, Steve Ranella, he has a show called Meat Eater. He's a hunter. And he says, I'm pessimistic with my mind, but optimistic with my feet. In other words, when he's out there hunting, he's always like, I'm not going to get anything. But with his feet, he says, keep moving, keep working, always keep working. That's exactly how you approach this. So people that are saying, wow, the Republicans look like they're going to clean up in 2022. No, it's not enough. Get as many people as you can registered, get as many people to the polls as you can, act like that the country's on the line, because in many ways it is. And if you sit
Right.
back on your laurels and say, oh, it's cool, we got this wrapped up, you're going to suffer the same fate that Hillary voters had in 2016 when they did that. You're going to look
Right.
foolish.
Sure. I mean, that makes me nervous about 2022 because you're starting to see that same mindset where
Yeah.
everybody thinks that even the Democrats think it's going to be this huge blowout. So that's something we as Republicans need to focus on, is being like, even though Biden sucks, even though we've got a horrible economy, runaway inflation, even though these leftists are authoritarian scumbags, they're violating people's rights, they're doing all this horrible stuff, they support lockdown, they're lockdowners, they want to close schools, they're corrupt, all these things. It's like, man, we still have got so much work to do, because I could definitely see 2022 going south.
Enough, right? Understand this too. So, one, you don't just want to win. Secondly, and for two reasons. One, because it has to be the right type of conservatives winning. If we just get a bunch of rhinos, that's worthless anyways. So you have to be diligent in that front. And second, you don't just want a one-seat majority, right? You have to understand that there's always going to be people that fall off. So you could always win more, right? So that, and if you need to see how important this is to never take stuff for granted, look at the election of Durr in New Jersey for the state seat. Remember, this guy was a truck driver that spent like $1,000 on his campaign. Something like
Right.
300 of it was at Dunkin' Donuts, and he beat the largest Democrat incumbent for the state election, the one that had served for the longest amount of time. That's because those Democrats took it for granted. If they would have taken that election seriously, Durr probably doesn't win. But they're like, oh, we got it in the bag. So never, ever give up anything, right? You go out, even if you're in the most, a lot of districts, that the Republican's going to win or that the Democrat's going to win, just based on how the district shapes out. You still need to drag yourself out there to vote on election day and get other people to do so, because it's important to make sure for all these reasons we talked about, to win.
Totally. So I wanted to keep this under an hour. I think maybe next time we can talk about kind of what the Democrats' strategy is in 2022. I think that's an interesting issue. Is what are the Democrats going to be trying to do in 2022 and stuff like that. But man, I think this was a great first episode, and I'm looking forward to a whole bunch more. And it'll be fun to do these as we run up to November 2022.
Agree. I think it'll be great. We also can't forget gubernatorial elections
Oh
that
yeah,
I think
for
are going to
sure.
be very important. So I'm sure we'll get into those as well. And yeah, I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm motivated. Listen, when your back's against the wall, when every institution's against you, now is the time. Once your back's against the wall, you have something to push back against. And so I'm motivated. I want to see positive changes in 2022. I want to see that lead into 2024. But I'm not happy just to have Republicans win. It needs to be the right type of Republicans.
Amen. Amen. And we're calling all Americans, regardless of your skin color, regardless of what language you speak, all Americans that support freedom and liberty and small government and the US Constitution, we're calling all Americans to join us, fight for freedom, fight for liberty, vote Republican in 2022, get the right GOP guys in there. And yeah, let's plan on doing this in about a month from now here in mid to late February.
Looking forward to it. It was a great show. Thank you so much
Cool.
for having me.
Yeah, thank you. We'll talk soon.